Hello, good evening, and welcome to the curtain raiser for the TOTO Creative Writing in English Award. This is the fourth curtain raiser event preceding the virtual award ceremony on the 19th of February, where we announce the winners of the TOTO Awards. Today, we meet and speak with the writers shortlisted for the English Award. But before that, a little about TFA. TOTO Funds the Arts was established as a trust in Bangalore in 2004. It was set up in memory of Angiras Toto Velani, who passed away in a tragic accident in Goa on May 24th, 2004. TFA gives young Indian artists a platform to share their work through readings, film screenings, talks, and other arts related events. TFA also hosts annual awards in the fields of music, creative writing in English and Kannada, photography, and short film. Rather than achievement, these national level awards are more in the nature of recognizing potential for artistic growth in these fields. TFA introduced two awards in creative writing in English in January 2006, which makes this the 17th edition of the English Writing Awards. These are being supported by the Mani Rao Foundation and Naboneeta Majumdar in memory of Dipali and Nitai Majumdar. For the 2022 awards, we received 275 applications, of which 4 have been shortlisted. They are Ashwin Vijayan from Kozhikode, Priyanka Sutaria from Nagpur, Solomon Maria Donald from Bengaluru, and Uday Kanungo from Bhubaneswar. In conversation with them is Radhika Iyengar, an award-winning journalist who writes on arts and culture, marginalized communities, gender, and history. This curtain raiser event, as are the rest of the curtain raiser events in this series, has been supported by Sucheta, Rashmi, Madhvi, and Deepthi in memory of the late father Shantinath Desai, a pioneering modernist of Kannada literature. Before handing it over to Radhika, a little bit about her. Radhika Iyengar is an independent journalist who writes on arts, culture, marginalized communities, history, and gender. Her work has been published in Al Jazeera, Huffington Post, Vogue India, and Condé Nast Traveler India, to name a few. Over to Radhika.
Thank you so much, Lekha, for that introduction. Let me begin by welcoming our viewers to TOTO Funds the Arts Creative Writing 2022 Curtain Raiser. And let me also extend this welcome to our shortlisted Fantastic Four. I look forward to making this conversation as spirit-lifting and engaging as possible. So let's begin. Priyanka, let me start with you. Could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work?
Yes, sure. So my name is Priyanka, and I am a poet who accidentally ventured into content for a few years, but now I'm back to my roots, as I like to call it. My pen has not stilled since I started writing at the age of 9, and whimsical pastiches of Roald Dahl's diction have, over many iterations of style and voice, eventually transformed into a practice that has its fingers in many thematic pies that often leave me with sticky fingers. But I think that sticky fingers make for very good writing instruments, because these very sticky fingers have landed me here as a part of the shortlist and this conversation. Apart from that, I have completed my master's degree in creative writing, and I quit my full-time job last year to start Ministry of Poetry, a platform where I offer creative writing learning experiences. And I'm very excited for this discussion.
Fantastic. Welcome. Okay, so let me just begin with, shooting right in. So the terrain of your poetry is rooted in like a celebration of love. And so I wanted to know what inspires you to explore a theme that's been constantly explored by poets and authors for centuries.
So when I started my master's degree, we were asked to put together a manuscript proposal, as they do. And at the time, my longtime partner used to tell me often that my primary emotional response to everything, no matter what it was hatred. I was filled with hatred, and it was coming out of my ears. So that observation had been rattling around in my mind for months, and I felt very clever putting together that proposal saying that I'm going to be writing an anthology of poetry called The Sum of My Hatred. Uh, Granted, I was silly and 23 and trying to sound very impressive, but it did turn into this year-long autopsy of my mental and emotional landscape. And in producing these 40 or 50 poems about hatred, I feel like I really purged myself of that emotion. And in the years since then, I have found a most wonderful asylum in the emotion of love, because I find that it can be so many things. It can be an act of revolution. It can be a moment of understanding. It can be a lifetime of joy. And most importantly, for me, it contains in itself this sort of rare and powerful paradox of both depth and also frivolousness. Because hate in its many, many forms always felt to me very static and dense and heavy, like an albatross around the neck. But love contains multitudes, and I always am chasing those multitudes, which is why I love writing about love so much.
Wow, what a lovely answer. Um, but there is this common belief that love poetry is very challenging to write since it's prone to cliche. So, can you tell me a bit about your process? Like, are you mindful about not falling into the trap of cliches, or do you gently allow the words to come to you, regardless of what the outcome might be?
So I feel that what happens with cliches is that when you put them on paper, they find a niche that already exists in the reader's mind and slot themselves in. So they fit into that space. What I want to
Mm.
do is create new grooves in the reader's mind. I want to make new markings. I want to make new imprints. And at the end of the day, I feel like all emotional states, including love, are cliches in themselves, right? Because it's why we have all these communal labels for them in every language, no matter how differently we all experience them as individuals. And the challenge is to find non-cliched language and write about these cliched emotions. And that challenge is something that I find very interesting. And what I like to do is that I write the first draft, however it comes out. I don't try to question it too much. I just lean into the process of translating whatever I'm thinking of. Usually it's an observation. Sometimes it's a metaphor that I've thought of by listening to somebody or reading something. And once I'm done with that first draft, I go through it and I find the bits that feel more embellishment and less a vital element of the poem itself, and I swap them out for what feel more concrete images or observations. And that's become pretty much a very routine part of my editing process, to wade through the poem and weed out, even if I really really like them, the parts of the poem that make it feel a little bit reminiscent or stale. uh, Kill your darlings and all of that stuff, but I'm willing to take out what feels like it's not fresh, or that it doesn't feel like it's entirely original.
Yeah, I mean that's something I also noticed because there's certain tenderness to your writing, but there's also this very clean, minimalist approach I think that you take with your writing. So has your choice of words or the direction a poem might take ever been governed by or swayed by the thought of what your readers may think or take with them after reading?
When I started writing more seriously around the age of 18, so between the ages of 18 and 2022, I felt I was doing that. Yes, I was pretty much leaning into what I believed the readers wanted to hear. So there are all these themes and keywords and phrases that I would try to like push into my poem. But no matter what I did and no matter how much I tried, it always felt like I wasn't being authentic to myself or my writing, because I ended up writing these very opulent, flowery poems, which always felt like they were somebody else's voice and somebody else's style and not my own. So I think once I recognized that, I sort of unspooled everything that I knew about my practice and I rebuilt it from scratch. Now the reader begins once my poem ends and never before that. Uh, so after the poem is written and done and shared, maybe then a reader has the choice to respond or appreciate or resist as they please. But while I'm writing, all I'm thinking about is how can I best bring out what image is in my mind. Is this word or metaphor or phrase or clause a well fitted costume for that emotion or idea in my mind, and am I conveying it the way that I want to convey it? And I know I just said that I want to make new grooves and create new imprints in the minds of the reader, but I am not so much focused on the reader's mind as I am on the block that I'm making to create that imprint. So I'm more focused on what I am doing with the poem to create those fresh markings than I am wondering where on the reader's mind I will be making that mark. So I choose my words very carefully, but it's me who's the editor and not the reader.
Okay, great. So you're trying to be as authentic as possible. It's basically
Yeah.
your voice on paper. Great.
And I think that it's hard when there's a lot of poetry that you end up reading, or a lot of people you end up interacting with who want to read poetry. But I think it becomes easier once I realize that I don't have to listen to it. I don't actually have to hear what other people are saying about my work till after it is done.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Okay, so let's segue to you reading one of your poems.
Yes,
So let's start with "Love as Heavy Pause." If you
sure.
could just read that out. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Love as heavy pause. Everything between me and you is perched on an M dash. Or it could have been any seat, comma or colon or open bracket, close bracket, but the seesaw of this is too delicious to resist.
I find this poem so, it does something to me because it's so short, and simple, but still, you can relate to it at some point. I'm quite intrigued by the analogy where you compare the workings of a relationship to a punctuation mark. The M dash, the seesaw, the idea of one person having the upper hand over the other, this constant shift in power equation. So, how did this poem come to you?
So I think the poem is to me a sort of metaphor of two things. First, although the poem does seem to imply this sort of upper hand and like power dynamic sort of situation, I actually think of it as a representation of balance, because just one person cannot have fun with a seesaw. It requires two people to do the push up, push down to actually have that seesawing be an enjoyable experience. And the second is that it's about what the M dash specifically represents to me, a punctuation mark that creates a bridge between two sentences. Both sentences can likely be full in themselves, but the M dash still makes them whole, which I really enjoy. And actually, there's a third thing, which is that I just love the M dash. It is my favorite, most beloved punctuation mark, and I really wanted to write an ode to it, but I didn't really want to go in a very ode-like direction. So I decided that I'm going to turn it around a little bit, make the ode to someone else, make the ode to the relationship, and have the M dash be a part of it.
Yeah, I also personally love the M dash actually.
Yeah.
But okay, let's move on to another poem of yours, Love as a Birdsong. If you could just read that out for us.
Yeah. Love as birdsong. In Australia, regent honeyeaters are a fading population of young birds without tunes and elders passing away before passing on their mating songs. I wonder what this spells out for us, our poetry, our pedantic romances, our collective songs of adoration.
So, what moment served as an inspiration for this particular poem?
I actually read an article about the regent honeyeaters, and it caught me at a particularly tender moment. So I cried, and then I wrote this poem. Um, it in a sort of like 6 degrees of separation kind of way mirrored one of my favorite poems called The Quiet World by Jeffrey McDaniel. And in that poem, he presents this alternative reality or a dismal future in which words are no longer available to us freely. And we have this daily ration of words and we must stick to it. And the narrator of the poem spends his days saving up his words to offer to his long distance lover. And it both reminded me of that and also made me feel so very sad that while these regent honeyeaters don't have a totalitarian government to contend with, I couldn't help but mourn the loss of a population of birds who just don't have anyone to share their greatest hits with or any love songs to drive them into each other's arms. And another thing is that when I read that article, I thought about how we don't know about so many ways in which the natural world, engages in mating rituals. We know the common ones. We know peacock dance recitals, or we know penguins that go rock shopping for their soulmates, or we know about that strange fish that makes that underwater sand rangoli. But I like the knowledge of the honey eaters because it makes me feel like I'm stepping into a whole new analogy, and I enjoy having that for my poetry. And mostly I wrote it because I don't know what I would do if I had no way to offer love poems to the world, and this poem served as that sort of, coming together.
Yeah, it's a lovely, very touching poem. Can definitely relate to it. Okay, great, Priyanka. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
speaking to
Radhika.
me. It was a pleasure. So now I'm going to go on to Uday. Hi, Uday. Are you there?
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Radhika.
Hi. Okay, so could you just introduce yourself to us? And also, while you're doing that, you can talk a little bit about your work.
Yeah. So I'm Uday. I'm currently a writing tutor at Ashoka University, and I've been at that place for about 3 years now. I did my post graduation in English literature. So that's all I've studied all my life, English literature. And pretty much that's all I know. No expertise in anything else. Uh, I've been writing for about 2 years now, only short stories though, and just trying to fine tune whatever I can in that form. So yeah, that's all my writing experience has been.
Okay, fantastic. So, Uday, can you tell me a little bit about your story, The World Without Us? Because at its heart, at its very core, it's a story about a brother and sister relationship, and there's a deep sense of loneliness in their togetherness. So, how did this story come to you? If you can tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so generally, whenever I'm in the process of beginning a story, it usually starts from a phrase or an image, some very particular and singular thing like that, not usually around themes or abstract concepts or things like that, not very general, but just, maybe a rhythm, maybe a sound, some phrase that I like very much and just comes to my mind, and or just a title that I'd like to use. And sometimes I very idiosyncratically just create a story just to fit the title, rather than the other way around. So it's very idiosyncratic like that. So this one started from an image of an image which occurs at the last stages of the story, where the brother and the sister are at the river bank, in the scene, and that really started it. And I kind of worked my way back, started to imagine how it could have began, and so I kind of worked in a reverse way, imagined how it would end, and then from that I sort of backtracked and tried to figure out how this could have begun. And the brother and sister relationship, it did occur to me in the mid in through the middle of this sort of instinctive process, that this is a very what I liked about it is that it's a very undramatic. I mean, it doesn't have any inherent dramatic potential as such. It's sort of, it's just there, the relationship. It's not going to, it doesn't have that climactic sort of direction that a romantic relationship would have, or doesn't have other dramas that other kind of relationships would have. So I kind of liked about it because it gave me time to sort of dwell on it more, um, bask in it more, and sort of try to detail it as much as I could. And it sort of, I liked it that the relationship, or the sibling relationship, wasn't something that I saw in fiction very much. So I kind of thought that this could be interesting to sort of pick out and detail as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you moved backwards rather than, I mean, the conventional way is to move forward. You start with something and
Yeah.
one thing progresses and, it leads to the other. But was it very challenging for you to like slowly unravel while going backwards?
Yeah, I think it was challenging in the sense that it took a lot of time. I started this story like last year, uh, sometime in 2020, December, I think. And for many months, it totally didn't take off. I just had an opening scene and I didn't know what to do after that. And so it just kind of gestated in my mind for 6 months, 7 months. After that, could I begin and sort of start narrating the whole of it one after the other. I got a rhythm. I got the rhythm of it comparatively long after. But I was kind of uh, confident enough that it would turn out okay. As soon as I found the rhythm, and so yeah. And as I said, it was the kind of uh, the the fact that not much has been done with that sibling relationship, and it also doesn't intrinsically offer itself as some sort of dramatic promise in a story. That was kind of reassuring to me, because I didn't feel the pressure of pulling off an ending, or sort of giving a very heightened state of sort of enthrallment to the reader. And I kind of like that I could settle down and soberly sort of delineate what was going on between the two of them.
Mm. And I'm also quite intrigued by your title, The World Without Us, which to my mind is very multi-layered. Can you tell me why you chose this title particularly?
um, I think the plain and boring answer is that I was reading a book on one of my favorite authors, Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov, and in a chapter on the critic who was writing this book, a chapter was titled "The World Without Us," and it kind of stayed there in my mind for, as I said, the story was progressing in my mind for many months, and I didn't quite know what to title it, or I hadn't gotten a rhythm of it. But after many months, I thought that this could actually work as a title, and simultaneously, I also uh, the sentence in the story which has the phrase "the world without us" also came to my mind soon enough. So I thought that this was sort of, I thought, enigmatic enough to suggest what the sibling relationship could mean, because there is a world without us before they came, and then there is a world without us, which will be the world after they go. And so that I thought that could work. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I could understand that. That is something we could take away from it. And then let's go to your characters. The narrator's voice is, to my mind, deeply relatable. And the sister is someone who I could imagine existing amongst us. So, how do you shape your characters and make them complex? Are you drawn to them? Like, are they a patchwork of the people you met in your past, or do you draw from your imagination?
Um, don't think that there has been much influence of people I've met or past experience as such. But for this story, I think generally I have a tendency while writing stories that I set the stories before I was born. For some reason, I always do that. So, uh, so I I tried to look at photographs from before 1995, which is when I was born, and I don't know. I try to sort of gain something from that, the way people, their expressions, their behavior, and so on. That partly gives me some kind of vague indication. Other than that, uh, the characters for this story, I was I tried to just maintain the voice of the narrator, and I thought that if I could maintain the voice for the length of the story, then it could work as a character. It just uh, basically I viewed it as not something that exists before the story, but something a priori to the story, but something which has to be constructed sentence by sentence. So as soon as so as I progress through the story, if the tone of the protagonist's voice is maintained, and if there's a certain rhythm that is continued, I hope that his character would be the sum of those tones and the sum of those voices. um, and in that I think influenced by the Urdu writer Nayar Masood, uh, and certain other writers like Edgar Allan Poe or Kafka, maybe. Um, but yeah, I mean, generally, I try to make the characters a of that world before 1995, and secondly, I just uh, try to sketch them rather than uh, make them speak as much. So there's very little dialogue in the story as well. So uh, that's what I hoped could lend them like um, a degree of complexity and nuance, which could make them, stand a bit firm in the story. So that's what I hoped for.
Okay, great. And could you now please read an excerpt from your story, The World Without Us?
Yeah, sure. Uh, More often than not, it was from my sister that I listened to the memories of our past. She reminded me when we were cleaning the courtyard how father had once climbed the copper roof in a last desperate attempt to catch the two parrots that escaped to blue freedom because he had forgotten to lock their cage where they had perched for most of their flightless lives. On humid nights when we had power cut, we sat outside in folding metal chairs to feel the breeze, and she recalled aloud how mother's soft voice would start humming, and then slowly cover like a cloak the lyrics of the song that played on the radio on nights like these. Listening to her narrate these things from the past felt to me like rereading particular passages of a book of which I only retained a vague sensation, or rediscovering bits of old paper with some surprise in one of my pockets. She made resurface in my mind memories of incidents that I had not known I had forgotten. When mother broke her ankle after slipping on a polythene bag that was wheeling low on the ground, her near accident on the street in front of our house when the motorcycle swerved at the last moment to crash into a big garbage truck. With each of her renditions, I regained the various angles through which I had glimpsed these things all those years back, where I was standing and what I was doing, what month and year it was, remembering them through her voice in the dark, silent air, with the wind periodically rippling through the swaying trees as if leafing through the pages of the night, felt like shining a torch beam into the vast, hazy hereafter, searching for the slightest trace of them. Not only did my sister remember our father in elaborate and minute detail, she had also inherited many of his moods and tendencies. Often in the background of her behavior, I could sense the imprint of his impulses, as if she was the most recent layer of life being written on the palimpsest of our bloodline. In his manner, she preferred the scholarly seclusion of the desk, and his prudence and foresight in financial matters was well reflected in the decisions she took on our behalf. She had made father and mother's room her own, since it already had all her and mother's clothes in the wooden cupboard, while I was given the room we had once shared. The third one was made into a kind of study, which she used more than I did, sitting at the mahogany table, facing the front window and the daylight framed within it, her economics course books lining its ledge, her pencils that lived longer than her erasers, pointing in different directions, her slippers lying parallel between the legs of the wooden chair, her steel table lamp inclined at a studious angle, and the rust-colored rings left by numerous teacups on many a midnight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. What intrigues me is your choice of words and the vividness with which you describe things. So, for instance, you use geometric figures and shapes to describe the narrator's sister's life. If I specifically look at the last paragraph, what you just read, and in a way, you use geometry to reflect that the sister likes stability, she likes chaos. How did the idea come to you?
I guess generally I like to sort of divide my stories into segments or like montages, uh, which can sort of sum up a character or a time period pretty in a series of sentences. So that was the idea behind that, to convey how the sister lived differently after the parents passed away, and how, in what way she was different than the brother. And yeah, her studiousness and uh, her sort of responsibilities, the attitude that she took after the parents' death, all that was something that I attempted to reflect through concrete terms, concrete, particular, visible, something that the reader could imagine and very readily place as, a visible marker. So yeah, geometry and anything shape related would obviously features heavily in it for that reason, because I generally thought that uh, reflecting it in an abstract way would just sort of make it vague or cliched. So generally my tendency remains towards making it more intricate, or somehow more something more prone to imagery, and something which just becomes perceptible instantly to the reader. So that was the general impetus. And I didn't actually make the connection between um, the sister preferring, so stability and that part. I think it was just instinctive while I wrote it, and I'm glad that readers are making that connection. um, so but yeah, definitely that passage and other later passages, I often try to sort of divide it into long montages, long sequences, which can sort of sum up a character, sum up a time period. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think personally it's a very clever way of describing a certain person and the way that person lives. So great, thank you so much, Uday. Now I'm going to move on to Solomon. Solomon, hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, I can. Yes, yes. Okay. So can you introduce yourself, please, and also talk a little bit about your work
Okay,
for the viewers?
sure. So I am Solomon. I'm from Bangalore. I should have been in Orissa because I'm studying development in NIT Rourkela. But thanks to COVID, it's been online classes so far. So before this, I worked as a copywriter for a while, around 3 to 4 years, I guess. And I started writing when I probably started writing when I was in college, a little bit in school. So I guess yeah, that's the origin story. Very bad. So yeah.
Okay, great. Great, thanks. So Solomon, when I was going through your work, when I was reading it, I realized that your work is rooted in magic realism. So when did you realize that you were drawn to writing about the mysterious beings or the inexplicable supernatural events?
Yeah. This goes back to the time when I was really young. So my hometown is actually one of the coastal villages in Kanyakumari. So every summer break was spent there, literally. So I used to be the youngest in the family, in my mother's side of the family, actually. So all my older cousins would never include me in the games. So I'd always be left out, sitting at home, waiting around bored. So I'd go spend time with my sisters who were at home, or my aunt, who would, they'd tell me stories just so I would fall asleep. But the story is so captivating that I wouldn't fall asleep. I would want more of it. So they would invent and improvise on these stories and keep making it better every day. So there's this one story that I remember, which my sister told me, and this is something that she has repeated 3-4 times. There's a story about a man who didn't want to wake his baby up because then she wouldn't stop crying, and she would wake up if he farts. So he would stop himself from farting by plugging cotton, and he did this for quite a long time until one day it burst and he launched himself into space. So there are stories like this, right? So this is what my childhood was made of. And then of course there's this side where my dad would, on repeat tell me the story of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. So and my world was filled with that. So I guess that's where it all started. And then when I started to write, I really could not do any sort of serious writing. I mean, I don't know. For me, having fun was important, and so that's where all these creatures come from. That's where all these scenarios come from.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And so, what I'm interested in knowing about is, you have these strange creatures, from the sea in your stories. You have these menacing wild creepers. You have these mysterious church bells, and lighthouses. So, what has been your source of inspiration? Like, do you live close to the sea, or did you live close to the sea at some point in your life?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't live close to nowhere near the sea right now because it's just lakes here in Bangalore. So I wish I lived close to the sea. But the thing is, I actually come from a fishing community. So my grandparents were fishermen, and they would tell me stories of what happened in the sea, right? So there's this one dried starfish which I had for a very long time until it sort of disintegrated into dust. So my grandpa would tell me that starfish actually, they were like actual stars that fell from the sky at night, and then they would like grow in the ocean. And my mom would tell me stories about her father, about how there's this one huge fish that that pulled his boat all the way from Kanyakumari to Gujarat, and then he had to cut it off because he couldn't go any further. There are stories of how dolphins would pop up, their heads on the catamarans, and he would sign the cross on them, and then they would disappear. So I don't know if any of these were real, right? But real life was sort of magical enough for me, and I think that's where I get my inspiration from. The stories that I've heard of people around me, the stories of the things that they did, the places they went to, and also because I was the only child for a very long time, and and after my brother passed, again I was back to the same situation. So I had to create these things just to keep myself engaged. I can't really stare into a space and be like, okay, there's nothing here. So I'll have to create characters. I'll have to, and I think I just like my imaginary friends a lot. So, yeah.
Okay. But you know what they say, right? That a lot of people believe that fantasy writing has its feet in imagination and it's completely not real and not part of this world. But also, I do feel like fantasy writing indirectly has a way of tackling genuine real world issues. So do you agree? And if you do you share a similar inclination?
I do. So I'm a huge fan of Arundhati Roy. So I think reading her has kind of molded me in that direction of hiding answers to certain real world questions, hiding scenarios from real world situations and stuff. Um, and for me personally, I think everything is about narrative. It's always about one famous narrative that is sort of being repeated over and over until that is kind of accepted as reality, right? So I just want to give people a narrative where they feel happy about it, where they're able to engage themselves, and it should feel real, but they should also have this feeling that, oh, you know what, I think I've experienced this somewhere. That sort of a feeling. It's the feeling that I had when I read Rushdie's Haroon and the Sea of Stories. So that he's kind of vaguely talking about Mumbai, but then you're like, is it Mumbai or is it another city? So that sort of standing between the fence, like here and there, but it's beautiful at the end of it.
Yeah, okay. So let's just give our viewers some taste of your writing. So if you could just read an excerpt from Songs from the Sea.
Yes. A month after Simon's death, strange things happened at the lighthouse. The rocks around it had all turned blood red. A strange wild creeper was growing on the building, and it was almost about to engulf it completely. The light had stopped shining, so the villagers thought it must be the creeper. They tried everything possible to kill the plant, but nothing could. No knife was sharp enough, no acid strong enough. Not even the strongest among them could uproot it. Everybody except Raja started to believe that Simon's death was some kind of a miracle. Some had very strange reasoning to it too. The Lord said, "Forgive and forget." Our dear Simon suffered from dementia that actually made him forget everything. Maybe he even forgave in the process. He died a pure soul. Proclaimed a villager to a group that gathered around for their morning cup of tea in the local tea shop. A week later, Raja walked back into the station. This time, it was much calmer than before. His father had left him abruptly and he needed answers. The last train had left the station, and some passengers intending to travel unreserved had curled up together in groups and fallen asleep. The old weighing machine was dead, but slowly flickered back to life. Raja's jaw dropped as he looked at the beautiful bulbs inside, forming patterns by lighting up one after another. He saw the colorful wheels spinning and playing a piece of faint music. He slowly walked close to it, stepped on it, inserted a 1 rupee coin, and closed his eyes, praying for an answer from his dad. The machine starts vibrating. The colored wheels began to spin out of control, and the music was losing its tune. It started rattling when Raja stepped off it, and suddenly it stops and spits out a card. Raja picks it up, and to his surprise, it had a message. What if time could tell? Raja pondered over the question for the next few weeks. The last few things his father kept mumbling were the words, "Please don't fly," and break out crying. He would waltz around trees and sing back at birds. Could all the stories his father told him have been true? What does this cryptic message even mean? These and many more questions haunted Raja every night. Adding to this mystery, something new was happening at the lighthouse. Flowers started blooming on the creeper that had covered the lighthouse. Roses, jasmine, carnations, hibiscus, sunflowers, daisies, and daffodils. It looked like a tall bouquet. The village was awestruck. How could all these flowers bloom on a single plant? It was a miracle And Simon was now being prayed to like he was a new God that humanity had now discovered. The members of the church were, however, adamant about giving up Jesus Christ and committing blasphemy. So they suggested the next best thing. Simon is a saint, they proclaimed.
Thanks for reading that, Solomon. So tell me something. As a young writer, how challenging is it for you to create a world that expects its readers to momentarily suspend all systems of logic?
I think people already do that. When they pray, when they follow a religion, or even when they're at the movies, there is a sort of a point when they let go of logic, and at least for me, I think life is far more boring if it's logical. If you have the answers to everything, then it becomes way too boring, right? There has to be some amount of mystery to it, something that you don't know, something that you are always curious about, and you don't want to lose that curiosity. You always want to keep pondering and find something about it. I think as as a writer, my challenge was to sort of bring out the geography of the place where I come from. I think that was what was I had to pick and choose because there were just so many things I could talk about, and so many words that I could use which came from my hometown, but it wouldn't really make sense to a new reader. So I had to find the closest possible thing or something that's present, at least on a global scale, and then mix that up with things that are new and present. That I think that was more a challenge than uh, kind of being illogical. Yeah.
Great. I think that fact that we are so religious, and at that time all systems of logic are suspended. I think that's a very, very good point. Thank you so much, Solomon,
Thank
for
you.
sharing your story with us. Now I'm going to call the last of the shortlisted writers, Ashwin. Hi,
Radhika.
Ashwin.
Hi, Radhika.
How
I
are
hope
you?
you can hear
How are
me.
you? Yes, I can
Good,
very
good.
clearly. Ashwin, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your writing?
Hi, so I'm Ashwin Vijayan. I'm from Kozhikode, Kerala, and I'm currently working as an assistant professor at Jamurin's Vijayan College. And I completed my master's in 2016, and that is right about the time when I started writing poetry quite seriously, in the sense that I started writing with an intention to, to find some readership, to find some publishers as well. So I've been publishing in small magazines since. That was the time also. I was under the mentorship of Professor K. Srilata, who taught me, and she's kind of the inspiration that led me to taking poetry as seriously as I do today. And currently, I am also a PhD scholar working in the field of poetry. Uh, I am part of a creative writing community called the Quarantine Train, and I also curate new poetry for Nether Quarterly. That's who I am as a writer. And I also completed a master's in poetry from Shimasini Center for Poetry in Queen's University, Belfast.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Ashwin. Okay, so I'm just going to get right to it. One thing I noticed in your work, is your clever arrangement of words, which offers a visual interaction for the reader when they're reading your poem. So in Changing Places, for example, words mimic the descent of steps. And in Nesting 2, you have experimented with poem's visual presentation. So how did this idea of playing with the structural anatomy of a poem come to you?
So experimenting with the way in which I can present words on the page is something that I have been excited about ever since I started writing poetry. But when I actually began writing poetry, I was much more conservative. I also wrote largely about myself, was very contained within myself, and I also wrote about my immediate experience. And I was also writing conservatively in the sense that I started from the left margin and went to the line break and try to use more regular kind of stanza structures and all those things. Even though most uh, Indian writers of English would have had this difficulty of you know uh, it's not easy to follow a traditional meter, but even then you can be very conservative with writing without applying any sorts of meter. That's where I was initially, but as I got more comfortable with the form, with the genre, with the ways in which I realized different ways in which I can experience and experiment words on the page. And I was inspired by other writers, especially Arun Kolatkar and Stephen Sexton. These are two poets who are not radical experimentalists in any sense, but who are very aware of how the poem presents itself on the page and the visual aspect of it. And visual aspect of a poem is quite important to me. That's how I ended up um, with those experimentations that we just mentioned earlier.
Great. But what takes precedence? Is it the visual aspect of the poem or the feeling or the thought that you want to convey? Or is it a marriage of both?
If you imagine one cannot be compromised for the other, then the tender balance of the poem itself collapses. They, I I usually never choose the poem first and then dive into the poem because that is almost certainly tended to fail. Because I am not somebody who is comfortable writing in traditional poetic forms. If you ask me to write a sonnet or a villanelle, I will struggle. But I have ended up writing as a screener, but not with beginning with the intention of writing as a screener. But the theme of the poem was served well by the form of the screener. That's how I often choose. If the theme is served well by a certain form, by a certain experimentation, just like you said, in changing places, it's the descending the stair that is kind of descending of the stairs is also that gives visually representing it as almost prayer like gives slows down the poem a little bit at that juncture where there is the uncertainty of the narrator also that needed to be conveyed. That visual effect, I hope, conveys that thematic sense as well. So if they do not work in tandem, I don't think the experimentation in itself would have failed.
Yeah, it really, I think what you set out to achieve, it does that very cleverly, actually. So, but also tell me something there, the being directionless and homelessness are two themes that feature a lot in your poetry. If we take the example of changing places or crossing, so how much of this have you drawn from your personal experiences?
So as I said, most of my writing actually stems from a very personal space. I begin from myself and my immediate experience of the world around me. And these poems and these ideas that you mentioned are no exception. I write mostly about these things, directionlessness and also homelessness are two of my greatest fears. Homelessness, especially the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of losing a place for call home. This sort of an uncertainty is something that haunts me at all points. The possibility of it, and the changing places is actually stemming from a very specific experience that I had while I was living in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is a city that I really love. I enjoyed staying there, but the 4 months I spent there were also some of the most terrifying in my life because there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that I could not control. One of those was I found it really, really hard to find an accommodation, find a place to stay. So, Changing Place is a poem that comes from that fear, that uncertainty. I'm also equally afraid of not being able to understand where I am going next, what I'm going to do next. I like to plan ahead, and when I am not able to do that, I feel that sense of directionless, uh, and that actually that fear often permeates into the poems I write as well. But not always as fear, but as also guideposts. So to avoid these sort of anxieties, there are certain things that I can do to navigate that, and through my poems, I also try to get to those things that help me alleviate that sense of formlessness. So that's what I try to do.
Okay, if you don't mind me asking, why were you having trouble finding accommodation in Hyderabad? And if you don't want to answer that, that's completely fine. Hello?
After I landed in Hyderabad to figure out a place for accommodation, but nobody wanted to lend out a place to a single boy in his 20s. Most of the landlords turned me away, and if I and I'm someone who wanted to have a space of my own. I wanted a room, at least if not an entire apartment for myself. I wanted at least a room for myself, which was actually quite difficult to find. There were plenty of shared accommodations, but I wanted a room for myself. And that is also the sense that I try to get to at the end of that poem, where, you know, the balcony from where you can stand and watch others, where you can be yourself, you can be a private self. That sort of a space is something that I was searching for and was unable to find.
Yeah, I think that poem will resonate with a lot of young people looking for accommodation. So, great. Okay, so tell me a little bit about your writing process. When an idea comes to you, do you just run with it, or do you take time, let it mull over it, let it simmer, and then you write? What is your process?
It's a little bit of both. It happens in that certain poems just uh, happen in a very short time. For example, the first poem of the set, Garden, it's something that happened in a very short time. I sat in one sitting, I almost wrote the whole poem and edited it very little. But which is also a very short poem, which is possible to do in one sitting. But the last poem of the selection, Oracle, is a much longer poem that also took much longer to take its current shape. It took me almost a year to actually formulate what I wanted to say and how exactly I wanted to say it. And there were certain ideas with which I started playing, and then it gradually shaped itself into a much longer narrative over the course of a whole year. And once I was done with the first draft, I sat down with it a couple of months after the first draft was finished, and then I was able to actually shape it properly. It's always an attempt to try and find the shape that the poem wants to uh, formulate itself into, and hoping that I will be able to identify when the poem finds its form. And I also get a lot of help from my friends who also write, and they help me. They sometimes ask me to stop when I'm overdoing my editing and other sort of stuff. So it's as always, writing is a collaborative process, and I'm very happy about the community that I've been able to find so far.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think as writers, we all have that nagging want to go back to what we've written and chisel it more and more. And at some point we have to just stop. So, but great that you've got support. Okay, so if you could just read one of your poems, Patinjara Tara, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Yes,
but you could just read that for us. Thank you.
yes. Padinyaratara. Here, this is our Atlantis, the boy did not say. He spoke with a certain lilt in his voice, with the slant of someone on whose tongue the tongue doesn't rest easy. We were on top of a small hillock on which the resort had just come up, and the slope ran straight into Karlad Lake. There we were, looking out at another body of water. This was no Atlantis, but a trolley problem. 10 houses drowned for the sake of 20,000 families irrigated and many more electrified. This little part of town, underwater, rusting. And the dam, named after Bana, son of Bali, swallowed up the whole region, sinking walls, roofs, gardens, trees, and fences as they stood. The bird saw the floodwater rushing, anticipating a landslide 20 years ahead, and flew to nearby hills. A few hills away, I sat reading a book as a kite failed to fly over my head. A leech hung from the inside of my left foot, drinking blood. I waited till it had its fill and eventually fell away. The sun sank and the ghost town of Padinaratara sprang to life, silent and underwater. Thank you.
So this is a very layered poem. I think it's very hard hitting as a social commentary as well. So can you tell me a bit about what prompted you to write this one?
So Padinaratara is a place in Wayanad, Kerala. I had visited Padinaratara and Karlad Lake with my family, and we had actually the guy who was posting us actually told us about the site of Padinaratara and how the town actually was a brief portion of the town was flooded for the sake of the Banasura Sagar Dam. And this whole story was quite interesting to me, and it also, as I said, almost all my poems start from a place of very personal experiences. But recently, I have started to expand my circle of concern much further, and this was one of those poems that allowed me to do that, to look at the society around me and to think about it. Even now, it's from my corner of the world. I'm looking out at the world from my corner of the world and seeing what I can see and thinking about the things that actually are taking place around us and about the voices and about the people, about the presences around us that are kind of underwater, that they, they are unheard. They are very much there, they are very much around us, but they are underwater, out of sight and out of our earshots.
Yeah, I think it's quite sad when nature is gutted in the name of modern advancement. Okay, great, Ashwin. Thank you so much for sharing your poem with us. And so now I'm going to open the floor for the four of you. So in case any of you would like to comment on each other's works or have questions for each other, please go ahead and do so. Is anyone interested in asking a question? Wow, silence.
It's a little sudden, but I actually quite enjoyed listening to everyone's work and to hear pieces of writing in the voices of the people who wrote them is always a pleasure. And yeah, I have a question for Solomon. Not a very difficult question, but a question about the ways in which you mythify your experience. Like, how do you go about that process? What are the things that help you do that? Are there any models that you make use of?
So, okay. I've never thought of this. I think it happens very organically. Okay, so one thing I was known for in school was every time they would, we would have these discussion with kids. I had very strict parents, right? So they wouldn't really let me go out after this curfew. It's very strict, and these kids would have amazing stories of how they spent 15 minutes extra standing by the bakery, talking about this, looking at these different kinds of people, and that social commentary would go on. And I would just sit there listening, and I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of this conversation. So what I would do is I'd watch. So since I'm home early, I would watch TV, and I would pick narratives from there and build my own story out of it. And I'd say, you know what, this is what happened, and this is what I saw yesterday, and this is what I did yesterday. So that's how my conversation would go. And one day I got busted because the story I picked was from a very famous movie. So they're like, hey, dude, we know the story. um, so I think that sort of spilled into how I picked characters, or how I picked situations to write. And now what I do is, instead of TV, I just look around. One thing that I do is, I mean, I hate working out. I'm not a fan of that, but I like walking really slow. I like riding my bicycle more than my bike. So because it's slow, because everyone around you is like running around. Everyone is some sort of a hurry, um, and in that panic, people kind of spill out their uh, the real self. They're not thinking much. They're just acting, and you are there as an observer when you're like looking around, and then you see, okay, a person walking a certain way, saying things in a certain way, certain sounds that you hear, and I think that's how it sort of comes together, and I build it.
Thank you, Soman. That's such a heartfelt answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will wrap up this very enthralling conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to me. And let's hope for the best. Best of luck to all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Radhika.
taking your
Thank
time
you.
to that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for the
you.
Thank you so much
conversation.
for this conversation.
Yeah.
And all the best, everyone. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Yeah, all the best to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.